friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a card for you using the new Heffy Doodle Quality Hugs stamp set. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with my two koalas, and I decided to go with the neutral grays today. The neutral grays are the newest in my collection, so I haven't used them a whole ton, so I thought I would give them a go. So I've pulled out N0, N1, and N3 because I want to keep them pretty light. And I'm starting with that N3 and laying in some shadows on the mama koala. I'm just going to do them one at a time. I like to keep the highlight on the face of my subject. So in this case, these two koalas are facing forward. So I'm going to do equal shadows on both the left and the right. Once I have everything laid in with the N3, I'm going to begin to blend that out with the N1, just making sure to go over the edge of the N3 and pull it into this midtone so that I get a nice smooth blend. And then I'll come in with the N1 and I'm going to fill in all the remaining white space. I'm just going to leave the centers of the ears and the nose and the pads of the feet to be white, or they'll be gray later on. So I am going to go in with a second coat of all these colors. This is something I do almost always. I just feel like it just really makes your blend so much smoother, and it also increases that depth and saturation because you're building up those markers with a darker layer. So I'm just going right over the same places that I've already gone with my previous shades and laying those colors back in. You can already see that it's getting much more concentrated there. And then when I get to my lightest shade, I often will leave just a little bit of space with only the one layer of that lightest coat, and that almost creates a fourth shade on there. So once I finish with the mama, I'm going to move over to the baby, and I'm going to color his little guy exactly the same, just using that N3 first to lay in those shadows, and then coming in with the N1 to blend them out, making sure that I keep the center of the face and the tops of the head and the ears light for that highlighted shade, the N0. And I will do a second layer on him as well, just real quick and easy. All the colors are already mapped out where I want them to be, so I just have to go in and do another quick coat of them. And it really is worth the extra time because it makes a huge difference. So now I'm ready to add in the colors for the noses and the pads of the feet. I'm using N3, N5, and N7. So I put a little N7 down at the bottom right of the nose, blending up with the N5, and then I'm filling in with the N3. So the lightest of my darkest shades is also the darkest of my lightest shades on those koalas. And then I will do the pads of mama koala's feet as well, just filling those in. Then I wanted to add in some rosy cheeks, so I'm going to use R000, R11, and R20 for that. Doing a little oval on the cheek area with that R20. Then I'll trace around that with the R11 to help the edges kind of fade into that gray. And I'm going to add some of that to the insides of their ears as well. And then I'll go around that one more time with the R000 and blend out the ears with that shade too. I'm going to keep the R11 and R20 and add in the R22 and start coloring in some of the accessory images. So I'm doing one of the little gifts, just putting that R22 down at the bottom of the gift, blending up with the R20, and then filling in with the R11. And I will do a second layer on that as well. And then I also wanted to do the bottom stripe on the party hat. So I just did the R22 and the R20 on that because there was not that much room. And then I'm going to do the bow on another one of those gifts just to have that color in one more place in this little scene. And then once I have that completely filled in, I'm going to move on to another gray combo. I wanted to have some white, but I didn't want it to be the same gray tones as the koalas, so I went with the warm grays. I used W00 and W1, and I'm going to shade one more of the gifts and then another stripe on the party hat and another bow, although later I changed my mind and decided to cover this up with another shade, but I think it would have looked nice this way as well. I just wanted to incorporate one of the other shades in another place on the scene, and the white area was a good place to add that. So I did another bow on one of the gifts, and then I'm going to bring in a completely different pink combo. I'm using RV00, RV02, and RV04. I'm going to color the top stripe of the party hat, and my RV02 looked like it was about to leak, so I just pulled off the other cap and then continued on coloring so that that would kind of equalize the pressure in the barrel so that I wouldn't have any leaking. So I'm doing another one of the gifts, just putting that RV04 down at the bottom, blending up with the RV02, and then filling in with the RV00, and then of course doing a second layer on that. And I know these two pinks right next to each other, they don't look like they really go together, but they're going to tie in with the background that I'm doing later on, and I think it all works together and comes together once I get those other shades incorporated with the stencil that I'll be using. So I'm going to do one of the ribbons on another one of the gifts, and then I'm moving on to the tree branch. I'm coloring that in E30, E31, and E33, and the sun would be hitting the top of the branch, so I'm going to put my shadow down on the underside with that E33, and then I'm going to blend that up with the E31, just making sure to go over the edge of that E33 so that that marker shade softens into the next one, and adding that to the ends of the branches as well. And then I'm going to fill in with the E30, again catching the edge of the E31 as I go. And I will do a second layer of these marker shades as well. Especially in this case, you could really see that the blend is not perfect, and so that second layer is going to really help smooth everything out. But it's okay if there's a little bit of roughness, because I am going to add some wood grain texture. I let that dry for maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and then I picked a darker shade to add in some detail. I chose E37, and I'm just doing some little swirls and knots and some little lines in there just to add some detail and give it a little bit more interest. For the leaves, I wanted a minty green, so I went with G00, G00, and G02, starting with the G02 at the base of each leaf where it's connected to the branch, and adding a little bit of shading there, and then blending that out with the G00, and then at the very ends where the light would be shining through those leaves the most, that's where I'm going to add my lightest shade, the G00. So once I get that done, I am going to go back in with a second layer, of course, just kind of really beefing up that concentration, especially with that G02. I want there to be a bit more vibrancy there at the base of each of those leaves where it is on the stem, and then just blending out once again. And I didn't bother with a second coat of the G00, but I did go in with a third coat of the G02 just to add a little bit of extra fresh color on that area where I wanted it. And this is when I decided to cover up the white that I had already done with these minty green shades. I just thought it would help pull those pinks together and also tie in a little bit more of what I'm doing with the background, having those minty green shades in there. So I just covered right over the W00 and the W1. They were light enough that it really didn't matter. It maybe added an extra bit of shading in there, but that's fine. But yeah, they were really easy to cover up with no issues, since the G02 is a much darker shade than the W1. So I did all of those white spaces now in the mint, and now I am ready to take a black Sakura jelly roll pen and just go over the eyes of my baby koala since they're open, make them nice and bright and shiny again. And then I also wanted to add a little bit of detail to my gifts, just to give them some different gift wrap. So on the first one, I just added some polka dots using a white Sakura jelly roll pen. On the green one, I'm going to do some diagonal stripes, just covering that. And they don't show up like super great on that light mint background, but it adds a little bit of something, and it's more visible in person. And then on the brighter pink one, I just did little plus signs for something a little bit different. So once I finish with those, I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. So now I'm going to use a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock to create my background. I'm also taking the Heffy Doodle vertical vines stencil. And because this stencil is fairly delicate and I want to be able to lift it up and put it right back into place so that I can check on the progress of my blending, I'm just going to take a piece of painter's tape and tape that down to my work surface so that it's kind of a little bit more stable. Then I'm going to bring in my first shade of ink, which is Saltwater Taffy Distress Oxide ink. And I'm just going to blend that on here and there. I want to get some different gradients of pinks. So I'm just kind of picking and choosing some places and using firmer pressure and lighter pressure so that that color is more or less concentrated on different parts of that stencil. The next shade I'm adding in is Kitsch Flamingo. And I'm just going to add that here and there as well, just kind of bringing those colors together. And there you can see that those two very different pinks, there's more of the peachy pink, and then there's the cooler tone pink, is tying in with the colors that I used on the gifts and the party hat. So adding that Kitsch Flamingo here and there, and then I'm going to bring in my third shade, which is Picked Raspberry, which is even brighter and a little bit darker. And I'm going to pick and choose a few places to add that color as well. And I want it to kind of hang down on the ends and then be a little bit shorter in the center. So now I can pick up that stencil and check my progress, and I can see where I want to add a little bit more ink and just kind of bring those vines down a little bit farther on that panel. And then once I'm happy with how that is looking, I can take off that stencil, and I want to do some splatter detail on this background to also add a bit more interest and just pull all those colors together. So I'm grabbing an acrylic block and I'm going to press all three of those shades onto that, just in their own little space on there. And then I'll add a little bit of water to each of those as well. Then I'm going to pick that up with a fine-tipped paintbrush. I believe that's a number 2. And I'm going to just splatter that all over the background. I like to start with the lightest shade first and work my way up. That way I don't have to clean my paintbrush in between. I can just move on to the darker shade. And I'm tapping that paintbrush off the edge of the acrylic block so that I can get some fairly fine splatters. I don't want any big globs. I really want more of a fine spray. So I'm going to set this panel aside to dry and then start to work on a new one. So I've got a fresh piece of Bristol, and this time I'm using some cracked pistachio Distress Oxide ink. And as I'm laying that color down, I am purposely using some lighter and firmer pressure so that I get a really splotchy background. I want it to look like that. And then I'm going to do some splatter detail with this as well, just spraying that all over the background. And what I'm going to do is take the Leafy Laurel circle die from Heffy Doodle, and I'm going to be cutting out some different background pieces from that. I also need some more pinks, so I've got another little piece of Bristol. I'm going to go back to all 3 of my pink shades and just add a bit of color onto that. Just starting with the saltwater taffy, and then right next to that I'll do some Kitsch Flamingo, and then right next to that I'll do the picked raspberry. And this time I'm going to take the flower dies from that Leafy Laurel circle die set, and I'm going to cut those flowers out of that pink panel. I also created the insert for the laurel part to be pink again, so that I would have a little bit more of a simple background, so that the vines in the background wouldn't detract from the focal images. So I just fit those 2 pieces back together and taped them on the back so I can pop that up with some foam tape. And then I've laid the focal panel and the background piece into my MISTI. It's not attached yet. I just have it there so that I can stamp my sentiment in the correct position. I'm doing the one that says Qualified to Party using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And then I can remove that and pop in my card base. I'm using some MFT Princess Pink cardstock and some Lawn Fawn bubblegum ink. And I'm stamping down the little cuddly koalas and wishing you a quality birthday. And I did have to stamp that down a few times. These were brand new stamps, so I cleaned them off with my stamp chamois and then restamped again. And the sentiment, because it was a bolder, needed to be stamped one more time, so that was nice and solid. And then I'm going to move on to my pattern paper. I'm using the new Heffy Doodle Man Cave 6x6 pad, and I've pulled out this pale gray pinstripe. So I have trimmed down that pinstripe piece to be the same size as the card front, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm going to glue that down to cover the entire card front, so just making sure that the corners line up nicely. The background piece I trimmed down to 4 by 5 1/4, so that is going to just give me a little bit of that pattern paper peeking out on the edges and kind of creating a little bit of a frame. It's also going to tie into the grays of my koalas. I've added some foam tape to the back of the focal panel, so I'm going to peel off those release papers and I'll get that lined up right above the sentiment. Make sure that I have the same distance on the left and the right, and then just press that down into place. Then I can bring in my images, and I'm going to start adhering the tree branch first. I'm going to put that down toward the bottom of that leafy laurel circle frame, and then I can add my mama koala sitting on top of that. And the little baby is going to be climbing up her back and kind of peeking over her head. So I'll add him right on top, and then he gets to wear the party hat, so I'll add that as well. Just tilting that at a little bit of an angle to give it kind of a whimsical look. And then I have these 3 gifts, and I wanted to create a little stack using them. So I'm going to also stagger them a little bit and tip them a tiny bit to the left and right, just to make them look a little bit more like a precarious pile of gifts. And I'm going to add that 3rd one, just tucking them in behind the ribbon of the previous one. And then I also die cut a bunch of little pieces that are extra in that leafy laurel frame. There are some more branches and then all those flowers. So I'm going to start adding in some of those to just fill in that laurel frame a little bit more, make it look a little more like a wreath. So I'm just adding those here and there wherever I think they look good. I'm not going to go around the entire thing. I'm doing more toward the bottom right and then a little bit less towards the top left. So I'm going to end up doing 3 at the bottom and 2 at the top, because I just thought that that looked the best. And then the rest of the laurel I'm just going to leave as it is, so that it kind of has a little bit of a variation to it in the textures of the leaves that go around. And then I wanted to start filling in some of the extra spaces with those flowers. So I'm just trying to choose some different combinations. There's 2 styles of those flowers, and I cut each of those florals out of each color twice so that I have a different mix of colors and shapes. So I'm just kind of, you know, laying them out here and there and making sure that I have a little bit of a variety. So in some places I'll do groups of 2 and in other groups of 3, just kind of trying to make it look a bit more natural and, you know, not too matchy all over. Some of the flowers I'll tuck behind the extra branches and some are on top, just, you know, trying to make it look pretty. I want it to look pretty nice and full, but I also don't want to detract from the focal images. I still want to make sure that they are the stars of this show, so just adding a little bit here and there to add those little pops of color. By the way, I did want to mention that if you're watching this video the day that it goes live, this is part of a Heffy Doodle inspiration blog hop. So there's a whole bunch of us who are hopping along and sharing some inspiration using the brand new Heffy Doodle release. So you'll want to check out my blog post down below, and I will have all of the information about who's participating, the links to hop along, and also the information about the prize that they are giving away. So definitely check that out when you get a chance. But for now, I'm going to just finish with these last couple flowers, just adding them in wherever I think they look good. And then, of course, I have to add a little bit of sparkle on almost all of my cards. So I'm going to take some Stardust Stickles and just use that to create a little center for each of the flowers. So I'm just going around and dotting that in. So it'll just add a little subtle accent that will really sparkle nicely when you tip it in the light. So once I have that done, I almost put it on the gift bows as well, but decided to just leave it on the flowers for today because there is a lot going on with the different patterns on those gifts already. So there you can see how that card looks, all of that detail up close, and another peek at the inside. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that like button, and I invite you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Make sure you ring that notification bell so you're always alerted when I post a new video, which is every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of these products, I'll have those linked down in the description bar as well. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you guys so much again for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.